I don't see the way to join on StreamYard, so if you want to drop something into YouTube, feel free, and I'll check back over in a little bit and see if there's anything there. So, Herod, son of a hero. Interesting. Doesn't tell us much. And I don't actually know which one to click on because there are a number of different Herods. Let's see if it's this one. This guy was the tetrarch during the whole period of the Lord's life. His name was Herod Antipas, son of Herod the Great. Frivolous and vain. All right. Ah, this is the same Herod that actually met Jesus. Okay. Herod the Great was the interesting character. Because the way that the Roman government worked, if you ever read some of the apocryphal books, you can understand a little bit more about the political setting that Jesus showed up into and what people were thinking he was there to do. But the way that the Romans governed was really smart. They usually had somebody from the local area who would become the governor of that territory. And I think that Herod was, let's see if we can find, he wasn't, I don't think he was Jewish. I think he was like married into a Jewish family. Let's see, Herod the Great. Let's see if this tells us more. An Idumean in Cyprus, an Arabian of noble descent. And according to some historical document, he was a wily person. Okay. Yep. He was the one who sent forth when the wise men came to see Jesus. He was the one who sent and killed all the children in Bethlehem. He restored the ruined temple in Jerusalem. Wow. And it looks like after his death, the kingdom was divided among 3 of his sons. Philip had the land east of Jordan between these 2 places. Antipas had Galilee and Perea. And Archelaus had Judea and Samaria. So when Jesus is traveling between these places, if you read much of the New Testament, you'll see a lot about Galilee and Judea and a little bit about Samaria. And so this ruling family, these are people with a lot of power. And they didn't like John the Baptist very much because he criticized what they were doing. And he, for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife. Now, why? Because John had been saying, it is not lawful for you to have her. Oh, this is very interesting. Okay. I have no idea what the historical context is. We have some direct quotes. It is not lawful. What is this word? Excestin. Excesti. Presents indicative. To be lawful, to may, to let. It is lawful or it is not lawful. I wonder if this is related to this is not lawful for a Jewish person, or if he is thinking that it's not lawful for anybody. Let's see where else this shows up. Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. See, I love these. Cross references can help you understand what the word is about. King David did something that was not lawful. Apparently, Herod's doing something that's not lawful. Jesus healing on the Sabbath is not lawful. And John saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have her. So something about Herod's sexual decisions were not lawful. Very interesting. Didn't know we were going to run into that here. But I'm curious as to what was going on. All right. I want to close. There. And though he wanted to put him to death, he feared the people because, why? Because the people held him to be a prophet. And I'll be sharing a post tomorrow about why Jesus asked about the ministry of John the Baptist, whether it was from heaven or from men. And the Pharisees were also scared of the people because the people thought that John the Baptist was a prophet. So there's something about John the Baptist which people are really like, he's really an influential figure here. And not only that, they're calling him a prophet. That's so like, it's intriguing to me because Moses was a prophet, and a lot of people in that day were looking for the prophet, which Moses talked about in Deuteronomy. I'm going to see if I can actually pull that up. Right? This is saying Abraham was a prophet in this place. This one, Deuteronomy 18. Something is happening here. All right, what fun. Prophets. The people in Jesus' day were waiting for this to happen. They were waiting for a new prophet like Moses. And we never really had another prophet quite like Moses. You have potentially Elijah, was very similar in that he was able to perform all of these miraculous things. But this says, this is Moses speaking. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your brothers. It is to him you shall listen. I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. And so I wonder, like, some of this seems to be speaking of all the prophets that we see coming up in the Old Testament. But in the days of Jesus, people were still looking for a prophet. And I think a lot of them considered John the Baptist to actually be that prophet. And Herod himself, who wasn't necessarily Jewish, considered him to be a prophet and was afraid of the prophet, but he was more scared of, looks like he was more scared of his daughter-in-law. And I wonder if this was his daughter or if this was simply the daughter of his brother's wife. So the daughter danced before the company and pleased Herod, so he promised with an oath to give her whatever she might ask, and her mother said, "Give me the head of John the Baptist here on a platter." My goodness, the influence of women on history is just incredible. The king was sorry, but because of his oaths and his gifts, he commanded it to be given. Like, this is so interesting, right? So Herod is the one who kills John the Baptist. Later on, he will not kill Jesus. You remember this? Like, when they send Jesus to Herod, he sends him back to Pilate and says, "I will not be the one to pronounce judgment." I think he really regretted what he did here. So Herod sent and had John beheaded. This is a disgusting person. It's so interesting, too, how Herod put John in prison, but the woman that he married was so angry with John the Baptist for saying they weren't allowed to be together. That's so interesting. She really held a grudge at him for that. Sexual ethics, right? So whatever it was that John was saying, it is not lawful for you to have her. Now I really want to know what was going on. Let's see if there's any kind of commentaries that have information about this. 5,000. I'm guessing some people probably just skipped over this. Martyrdom of John. All right. I'm reading fast. Sorry if this makes you dizzy. Looks like it's coming through okay. From the account in Mark, it would appear that after his imprisonment, he gained great influence over the Tetrarch and led him on some steps on the way of goodness. Okay. Who were... I'm just going to run a Google search on this. And who was Herodias? Oh, all right. The wife of Herod Antipas. However, as we I've learned from the passage, she was first, it looks like, the partner of Herod Antipas's brother, Philip, who ruled over a different section. So it's very interesting, right? Because you remember how we looked at where these three brothers, they ruled these different parts of the territory. And it looks as though, censured by John, as transgression of the Mosaic law. This is the opinions of Encyclopedia Britannica. So Herod was the ruler, it looks like, Galilee and Perea. However, nothing about that. It seems as though she'd been married to Philip and now was married to the other king. And John the Baptist gets involved in something that was probably a politically significant quarrel. And the woman bears a grudge against him and requests his death. And this is how we have the end of John the Baptist. So John had been saying it is not lawful for you to have her. And this is fascinating to me that he would say this, because Herod wasn't a Jew. He was the king of the Jews in that area. And why would John be telling him that what he was doing was not lawful? Was this a reference, as Britannica suggested, to Jewish law? Or did it have something to do with Roman law? Really curious. You're going to love how Matthew phrases this. For the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife. Britannica just simply says it was Herod's wife. So who knows what happened, but it looks like for some reason, whatever, John the Baptist had said this is not lawful, and she wasn't happy about that. So John the Baptist is beheaded, his disciples took the body, buried it, and went and told Jesus. So here you have this handoff from John the Baptist, this prophet, to Jesus. And the first thing you have taking place here, Jesus hears this. He withdrew in a boat to a desolate place. I probably would too, right? John the Baptist is my cousin. Herod is very powerful, and it seems in this case unpredictable. I'm going to go somewhere that is a desolate place as well. It seems like a pretty smart move. However, the crowds heard it, and they followed him on foot from the towns. Let's remember, when we first heard about John the Baptist, all the crowds were going out to him from all the towns. John the Baptist was baptizing people. Jesus, he's still around water, but he's not at the river, he's at the lake. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. So, this right here, Herod says, this is John the Baptist. He has been raised from the dead. That is why these miraculous powers are at work in him. So what Matthew is attempting to do here, it seems, is make a connection between John the Baptist being a prophet and Jesus being a prophet, and using something of miracles as well as the people going out to prove that, oh hey, one prophet has been killed, another prophet is here. The disciples saying, send the crowds away. And they said, here's the food we have. You give them something to eat, Jesus says. It's an interesting exchange. They said we have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish. And this is the point where I really want to be with a scholar who's more advanced than me, because the way that the Hebrew people communicated was similar to the Egyptians. at least if you wind your way back, there is a numerical value to Hebrew words. Every number has a meaning or significance. For example, 40 days and 40 nights, and I go and look that up. 14 generations. That's another thing. There's all of these numerical meanings that you can find when you look in the text. And here's one that I don't immediately understand. So again, when I bread, fish, two fish. Some people compared this to the astrological sign of Pisces, which is two fish, saying that he's initiated an age. And that's kind of interesting. An interesting association. He said, bring the years to me. But what happens? They all are satisfied to make 12 baskets for one piece of money over. There's a full basket each one of the disciples. And there's about 5,000 children. And that's a lot of food. From 5 loaves to 2 fish, feeding 5,000. 5 to 5,000. 1,000 times. All right. Now again, these cross-references are saying that this story is also Mark and John. This story of 5,000 is included in all of the Gospels. So that means that all 4 of those writers really important to the sides. Going back over to YouTube just to see if there's any comments or thoughts so far. See if I open it up. And turn the volume off. Close that. Yeah, I don't know how to invite people to join at this point. But the goal of doing this is just really to give myself a chance to come in and do kind of study. And then invite you into my process. And then like I do teaching and exploration of all these passages, particularly the ones like this. And I'm back to it. Well, the first thing that I'm focusing on is the transition from John the Baptist to Jesus. So now after everybody's in and they've been fed. He's not baptizing everybody, right? John the Baptist baptized everybody. Jesus isn't doing that. He's filling their stomachs, which seems to be a much less holy activity. One might imagine. At least in prejudices. But for some reason, Matthew's very important to show from John the Baptist to Jesus, the one who feeds the multitudes, and Jesus, the one who walks on water. So making these disciples go into a boat and to the other side to dismiss the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, it's hard for me to dismiss a crowd of 10 people on Zoom. This would be. Can you imagine a crowd of 5,000 for one person who don't have a loudspeaker? Like a lot of them had just healed from things that they probably thought they were going to live with their whole life. I feel like this took a while. So the boat was a long way from the land by the evening, and then late at night. So they were far away, and they really didn't get very far. It looks like the wind was against them, so they basically got stuck out in the middle of the lake. And Jesus came to them walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, do we have any people here who believe in ghosts? I wonder what this word is that they use here. He said it is a ghost, a phantasma, a phantom, a spirit, an apparition, a specter. Now, why would they say that? Why is there a word for that? A. These are the only two times it occurs. Is when they're talking about Jesus walking on the sea. Then you have to start wondering about all of the legends and stories that people have when they come back from the sea. So they're afraid Jesus is a specter. They don't seem to think it's him at all. But immediately he spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." I love this. It just feels so gentle. It feels like something a little lost child who's terrified, suddenly their parents there. That feeling of relief. And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you." So this guy is not the smartest. Like, if this is you, tell me to come to you on the water. I don't understand. I don't understand why he would say that. Like, you're out in a boat, you see a specter walking towards you, it claims to be your friend. Your response is, "Hey, strange apparition that I was scared of just before it spoke. If it's you, my friend, tell me to do this." Kind of like a test of if it is you. Maybe. Or maybe he was excited. Maybe he was like, maybe Peter knew that he could do it too. He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. And so much respect for this. I don't think they had seen this happening before, or they would have been like, "Oh, look, it's Jesus walking on the water again," instead of "it's a ghost." But Peter's saying, "Let me do this." So Peter gets out of the boat and walks on the water and came to Jesus. He was ready for something new, right? The boat he was familiar with. He knew how it worked. This walking on water is something he'd never seen before, most likely. He got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Some manuscripts read "strong wind." I'm going to let my imagination run with this just a minute, because this word for wind is also often, let's see, this might actually be the word for spirit. Do we have that? Let's see. No, this is a different one. This is a different word for wind than pneumos, animos, which shows up as wind 31 times, tempestual winds, cardinal winds. Very interesting. So partly breath and to blow. But this is distinct from pneumos. This doesn't have the same implication as wind often has. There's a message that I love from a preacher friend of mine who talks about how whenever the Spirit of God shows up, there is wind and fire. And you have phrasing in the Psalms that he makes his ministers winds and fire. So there is something about this presence of God that involves wind and fire. And so I was thinking, well, what if Peter sees something spiritual going on and becomes afraid of it. But it looks like he's just paying attention to the wind. And I imagine it's been stormy all night, so this makes sense. When he saw, it's not felt, experienced. When he was blown over, he was afraid and began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." So he's not afraid of the water. He's fine walking on the water, but something about the wind makes him afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." This is like, what a story and what a picture, like of some crazy spiritual stuff going on with him. Beginning to sink, he cried out. He was afraid. He saw, he was afraid, and beginning to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" Now, this is partly a compliment, little faith, right? You have a little bit. Why did you doubt? And this is what Jesus addresses. He addresses doubt. So whatever happened here between Peter getting out and walking and him becoming afraid and sinking, what happened in there was something called doubt. And I want to see if we can open this up and see what the word is. Part of me is actually trying to learn Greek as I go along and move through these things. Distadzo. Looks like it doesn't show up very often. 2 times, to doubt, to waver. 2 places that it shows up are both in Matthew. And Matthew 28 is when people see Jesus at the end of time after his resurrection, but some doubted. What I'm drawn to is actually the parallel between what happens in these verses to describe the doubt and what happened in the book of Genesis. Because the word to see, when he saw, this is where his attention went, was to the wind. This reminds me of when Adam and Eve saw that they were naked and they were afraid. Something they saw made them afraid. Here, the disciples saw, they were terrified. Peter saw, he was afraid and beginning to sink. So there's something about fear and faith that are connected here. It's like the hashtag faith over fear. I'll probably put that on the description for this study. Okay. And now I'm just imagining the circumstance, right? So Herod has just killed John the Baptist. There's this huge spiritual upheaval going on. Crazy winds, and Jesus is walking on the water. Peter is walking on the water. And he needs to be rescued because he doubts. You know, the thing he didn't ever doubt, though, was that Jesus could save him. This is just, it's warming my heart to see this, because so much of my Christian journey was spent trying to save myself and being afraid that I wasn't getting it right enough, or that I was going to mess up or do something wrong along the way. And here's Peter out walking on the water, doing the impossible, and he doubts. And he gets rescued. He gets saved. Jesus immediately. He wasn't like, "Oh, Peter, you should not be afraid." He's like, "Here, let me help you. Let me do this. Oh, you've little faith. Why did you doubt?" What did he doubt? What were you scared of? But that's not what Jesus asked. He asked, "Why did you doubt?" So if that's the question, let's go back and look at what Peter was doing. Why is he doubting? Was he somehow doubting that it was actually Jesus in this Lord, if it is you phrase? Or is this potentially connected to the when he saw the wind, he was afraid? I'm curious. He sees the wind. Yeah, I think it has to do with where he chose to put his focus. What is it that he saw? First, he's seeing Jesus, and now he's seeing the wind. And it was his choice which one he was going to see. First of all, he sees the possibility. I can walk on the water. Heck, I would want to do that, right? If you had a chance, would you take it? I don't even know. Like, imagine being out in the middle of a huge lake or the ocean, waves, wind, storm. You've just been scared of a ghost showing up. Do you have the kind of faith that would make walking on water exciting? Or do you have the kind of mindset that walking on water is something terrifying to be afraid of? And it was his choice about where he was going to focus. And this is always the choice that we have. Are we going to choose to focus on the wind, the chaos? Because this chapter is describing chaos happening. And if he was choosing to focus on that, he was going to be sinking. He would be doubting. This thing about faith. Like, I still don't even know if I would get out of the boat. Like, he had to have had a lot of faith in something to do that. Because it wasn't his experience. Why did you doubt? He doubted because he saw the wind. So I'm just going to take the conclusion and keep going. That when there is wind, we still get to choose what to focus on. Is it the circumstance around us? Or is it something underlying that? Do we have faith? Do we always believe that it is possible to do the impossible? And that when we don't have faith, we can reach out for help. Like, this is just so reassuring. When they got into the boat, the wind ceased. I mean, this honestly, it makes me think again that something spiritual is going on. And I wish I had a famous, like, I wish I had a commentary that I really loved. Maybe let's click into this one and see if there's anything interesting. Lots of streaming. No. Because I would love to see someone else's perspective on this. 1424. This one does something. Nope. Text commentary. $14 to $15. Let's scroll down and see. I'm really curious what the spiritual symbolism is that's going on here. The wind ceased. All right. As long as we keep our eyes on Jesus, we can walk on the water. I feel like this is the classic sermon right here. It's the easy one, but there's something else going on here with the wind. Because why didn't the wind cease when Jesus was walking on the water? Why didn't it cease when Peter stepped out of the boat? Why was it that the wind kept going? The wind that scared Peter. And I think this is still the Animos wind stopped. It just stopped. Ekopasin, kopadzo. To grow weary or tired, to cease from violence, to cease from raging. Okay. This And those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." This is so curious. His disciples believe that Jesus is the Son of God now. They don't just believe he's the next prophet after John the Baptist. This is why I say exploring the Bible is such a mystery. It's like a treasure hunt that you have to go in and look for stuff, because I want to know how many times previous to this Jesus had said he was the Son of God, or how many times this phrase showed up previous before we get to this passage. I want to know what it is about what just happened here that made the disciples of Jesus, who were already his followers, they already believed something about him. What is it that made them at this point say, "Truly, you are the Son of God"? What is it about what happened here that leads them to this conclusion? They didn't say it here after the feeding of the 5,000. They said it after this experience. Something about, I want to know. Do you have any ideas? It looks like we have one other person on here. Would love to see a comment or a thought. Sometimes your brain kind of hits a dead end and it's like, all right, what's actually going on in here? So I'm going to go back to this relationship between the wind and fear. There's something that Peter is afraid of that causes him to doubt. It's the wind that causes the doubt, and it's the wind ceasing that leads to the worship. And again, the feeling that I got from reading this, Jesus' response to Peter sinking, was one of so much peace and stillness. Now, when we think about the boat, you can think of this potentially as sort of like ministry. It's a vehicle of ministry, a way of going somewhere. And the disciples are in the lake without Jesus. They'd been sent, but they were sent without their leader. It's almost like, I mean, I'm probably pushing this in terms of the meaning of the text, but it's almost like you're missing the leader, and Jesus comes to them now, not just as the guy who called them as fishermen, because they were pretty good. These guys were good in a boat, right? They didn't have trouble being in a boat. He is now their leader as the Son of God, not just as a rabbi. And I think that some of what Matthew is trying to get across here is that John the Baptist, who baptized people into something, into a baptism of repentance, into changing their mind, this transformation, Jesus is baptized into that. But now he's doing something even more. He's not just the next prophet. He is, as they're saying here, the Son of God. So we show Jesus and food, Jesus and crowds of people, which to me is impressive. Jesus and wind, Jesus and water. Wind, water, food. And then here, they came to Gennesaret, and we have more stories of what happens here. In Mark chapter 6, we have this story. Interesting. I'm curious, is this where we get the man who was possessed by a demon or not? I'd be really curious if that was the next thing. Okay, Jesus walks on the water. Oh, look at this. Mark and Matthew have a very parallel story here. Let's see how Mark introduces this. So Mark has a preface. Jesus in his hometown, rejected at Nazareth, sending out 12 apostles, sending them out. And if we remember the symbolism, right, in Matthew, he sent out the 12 in a boat into the lake, into the waves, into the storm, into the wind. Here again, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. Others said he is Elijah. He is a prophet, like one of the prophets of old. So Mark is giving this a more spiritual overtone, because the people are casting out demons at the beginning, and then after the feeding of the 5,000 and the walking on the water. and here Mark says we need to understand Jesus getting into the boat with them and the wind ceasing. Here's a clue for how we can think about it. They did not understand the loaves. What? Oh, wow. They would have understood, like Mark is suggesting here, that the disciples would have understood what happened with the wind ceasing if they had understood what happened with the loaves. And what is it that happened with the loaves? So curious. It seems to be that it's something about Jesus' power within nature, because you don't just multiply food like that. Like this is stuff that doesn't happen. Walking on water, multiplying food. And if they had understood something about that, something about Jesus' ability, they would have understood what happened with the wind ceasing. But this, again, it seems like a nature phenomenon. And here we again have Jesus healing the sick. Now, I'm not sure why I thought they crossed over and they... Marcus? Wow. Every time I get into study the Bible, I feel like I have so much more to learn. And so the very next thing, breaking the traditions. Amazing. And I love this passage in Matthew and this passage in Mark. It's just so interesting. I did a teaching about this in the webinar this past week on what defiles the person. So much. Okay. Let's stick with Matthew 14, or we'll be here all night. It's been almost an hour, just kind of working our way through the passage, seeing what comes out. When they crossed over, they came to land at this place. And when the people recognized him, they sent around to all that region and brought to him all who were sick, and implored him that they might only touch the fringe of his garment. I want to know what's happening here. Like, what is it that Matthew is trying to communicate about Jesus? Because John wasn't healing the sick. Herod's frame of mind says it would have to be somebody who came back from the dead who was doing this. Here, the disciples think it's a specter or a ghost. Mark says if we understood what was going on with the loaves, they would have understood why the wind ceased. So I think there's this attempt to wrestle with what Jesus is doing in the natural world, setting him apart somehow from John the Baptist, who is simply teaching about repentance and telling the king that he's not supposed to be married to this woman, which is, it's interesting because the king actually married her. So John the Baptist isn't basing his criticism off the marital status argument that most of us look at today. And of course, that's a sidetrack. But let's actually, I want to go back to that, because that is the most interesting part of this passage to me. I'm like, what was it that was not lawful for him to have her. If Philip had died, it would actually be Herod's duty to have sex with her if she didn't already have a son. Uh, so it wasn't that. Philip was probably still alive. I wonder if they had just not legally divorced, because according to Jewish law, if Philip didn't want this woman as his wife, he could have just given her a certificate of divorce, and then it would have been lawful for Herod to have her. Right? The only thing that wouldn't have been lawful, according to the Old Testament law, was for her to go back to her original partner. So, what is John communicating by that it is not lawful for you to have this woman as your wife? If we, let's just go to the Ten Commandments for a moment. Because when I teach on these, I like to cover the relationship between adultery, coveting, and stealing. And I saw a post this week on Facebook about the relationship between these things. So I'm not the only one seeing that, and that's always reassuring when you're not the only one to notice something. But this idea of adultery is having sex with a woman who belongs to another man. And that would be unlawful. So if John the Baptist is accusing Herod of adultery and saying this is not lawful because it's adultery, that would imply that Philip, his brother, had never given up Herodias, had never given her a divorce, that she had just left him and came to Herod. And let's just imagine, right? This could have been any sort of a story. And all we hear here in this passage is that it was not lawful. So, not lawful, most likely it was a case of adultery. But if Philip had given her a divorce certificate, it's no longer adultery. Maybe it is stealing. Maybe it's coveting. Who can say? Have no idea what's going on. But I wanted to clarify that piece about adultery. And we can imagine a story. If we were to write a story around this, you could have had, maybe Philip was not a nice guy to be married to. Maybe Herodias had an awful time being his wife. Maybe he was abusive and she left. And of course had met Herod, so probably came to his place. Their family, right? He's a brother-in-law. Where else would you go, right? This was a Hebrew thing, is that you would stay with your family, with your relatives. The family unit was much more of a broad thing and less of a one person, two people and their kids. It was the extended family, the relatives, the cousins. King David refers to his cousins as, this is flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone, the same word that Adam uses about Eve to say this is me. The blood relationship was really important. But there was something about the marriage which made that sort of sexual engagement with close family members something that was written about later on in the book of Exodus. I believe it's Exodus chapter 18 or Leviticus 18. This shows all of the people who are close relations who you were not allowed to have sex with. So this will have something about probably will have your brother's wife. And so I wonder if John the Baptist's application of this was something like, hey, even if they were divorced, she has been your brother's wife. Again, speculation. But now imagine you're this woman and you left an awful relationship for another, seems to be reasonably awful relationship. Who knows? These kings are very tough to predict. And this guy says, this prophet, this weird, crazy man out in the desert says it's not lawful for you to do this. And what he's basically saying is this is offensive to the Jewish people. We have this law about Maybe it's not committing adultery, not uncovering the nakedness of your brother's wife. Hard to say. And also, let's just take a side note. And one of the things that I find absolutely fascinating about this passage in Leviticus is that every last one of the patriarchal relationships are included in this list of you shall not do this, including Moses' own parents. So there's something very distinctive about this list, and that's why in many ways I'm hesitant to apply Leviticus 18 to the situation in Matthew 14, because Leviticus was a very specific circumstance, and it was also dealing with clean and unclean as opposed to lawful and not lawful per se. And again, Herod was not a Jew, so he shouldn't have technically been under the Jewish law. So this is going to be something to ponder a little bit more. I really have no idea what he would be saying here, that according to Jewish law, somebody who was not Jewish was not allowed to marry their brother's wife. And is confusing because we don't know her marital status at that point and whether Philip had divorced her. And to my mind, it's just incredible that when it comes to these legal arrangements, the fact that if Philip had divorced her first, it would no longer be considered adultery is just, it's fascinating to me. Like this intersection of the marital status and the, what should we say, the sexual agency of the woman was governed by the document that the husband had to write. Like, it's crazy. But it's been an hour of diving in, and to be honest, it usually takes me about an hour to 90 minutes to get through a passage and just find all these little things and to raise more questions than answers. But this was my first go at doing something like this. I called it Sunday Night School because I'm like, this is more like school than like anything else, because we're truly just diving in, seeking some understanding, hopefully growing some of our ability to read this text, to explore things. I may clip some pieces out of this or whatnot, and I may do it again. If this is something you want to join for, though, drop a comment or send me a message. And I want to figure out a way to actually invite people to join in. I'm still I'm looking over here on the side, and usually when people use StreamYard, there's a way to join in. I'm just going to compliment myself temporarily and see if that shows up over here in StreamYard. It does. Oh my goodness. You can just drop a comment in YouTube and it shows up. Okay. Well, I'll make that clear next time and take a look. Yeah. So I'm open for a little bit more engagement and to invite some participation here. And if you have any questions, like after the fact, or you have some thoughts, or you have a link to some commentary that seems really cool on this passage, or especially if you know of what's going on with the wind, that is the most intriguing part to me. That and John the Baptist's "This is not lawful" quote. So between those two, there's definitely more to think about, and feel free to drop your resources and perspectives there in the chat. And one quick update: if you happen to watch all the way to the end of this, I think it's probably more fun in person. But I will be having a webinar on Thursday night where I talk about sex and spirituality from a Christian perspective, and we're going to actually look into where we get the perspective that sex is a sin, and how we can look through the Bible and do a study that is much more organized than this. It's one that I have prepared in advance to understand why sex is sacred and what that means and what that implies for us as we seek to achieve the goal of the work that I'm doing, which is to be spiritually faithful and sexually free. Because these two things, believe it or not, actually go together. So if you're curious to know more about that, check out the website link. I have somewhere in my About page. And let's see, I can even drop it as a comment here. Let me do this. And the link to register will always be on my website, drkevinjensen.com. Love to see you there. And yeah, let me know if I should try this again, or switch it up at all, or if there's a passage you think that would be really fun to explore. I have probably 3 or 4 big questions to unpack. Tonight was a bit of a last minute, but at least it was a first start. So see you soon.